How we doing, Countryside? Good. Doing good this morning? It's great to be here. My name is Sean Brayland. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and I am loving this Christmas season. Winter is my absolute favorite time of year. Anybody with me on that, winter fans? Like two of you. This is great. The rest of you? You picked a great place to live, huh? But great. Just wanted to say welcome, whether you're here with us live or you're joining us online. It's great to have you here today. One of the things that you'll notice really quickly if you when you walk into this building is that there are babies everywhere. Have you noticed that? Like they're just part of the reason why we're doing our building expansion later on. But there are like little tiny people running around everywhere. Like after this service is done, we pull these chairs up, and there's just an army of them that run around the gym. I don't even know when they leave. They just kind of do that. You don't get in front of them because they will take you out. And but it is great. It's funny when a husband and a wife are going to have a baby soon, and many of them they'll go out and they'll buy a book of baby names, right? Some people like have the names all picked out. They're like, if I have a son, it's gonna be named this. If I have a daughter, it's gonna be named this. And like, but then there's others that have a harder time with that. They have to buy a book, and that's how my wife and I did it. It's got all the best names. It's got what they mean, and you're trying to find that perfect name for your child, right? And so, it's like if it's a girl, what are the options? If we have a boy, what are the options going to be? And our firstborn, we went through that process with him. And so we get to the point where we figure we've settled on a name, and he wasn't born yet, but we named him. And so we cut out these beautiful wooden letters and like paint them, stained them up really nice, and we set up our nursery in our apartment that we were living in at that time, and we hung these letters in this awesome like little arch thing above his crib, and I took pride in that. I was like, I did an awesome job on this. And if you know about my craftsmanship skills, you'd know that was a big deal for me. And so we do that, and we go to the hospital to actually have the baby. And I say we, like I had a lot to do with that process. And but we have him, and my wife and I, we both look at each other. We're like, this name we picked it doesn't fit him. Like, this is not gonna work. And so we're there in the hospital. We pick a different name, and we get checked out a few days later because they won't let you check out unless you've got a name picked out, right? And so we get home, and there on our nursery wall is the wrong name that we didn't name our kid. On there. And we were so stressed out about this whole new child thing that we just left it there. It was like a month or so before I finally got around to taking that thing down. But it's interesting, isn't it? Names are a big thing, a huge part of who we are. And so many of you were named after somebody significant, a family member, a famous historical figure, something like that. Some people, when they're naming their kids, it's kind of funny, like they have to avoid certain names, right? Just because it won't go together real well. And so Pastor Mark and Christina, they had an interesting dilemma when they were naming their kids. And so, because they have a last name that not every name goes with. And so they were having their daughter, their firstborn, and they'd almost decided on the perfect name, Lucy. Some of you get that right now. And so Christina reminded Mark that their last name is Fur. And maybe Lucy Fur isn't going to be a great situation to walk into. And so especially when you say it fast, Lucifer. Just, it was a good catch. But this is a big deal, right? Picking the right name is extremely important. And we're in this series that we've been in for a few weeks called His Name Is. And throughout this series, we've been looking at this verse in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, which is a prophecy. And a prophecy is just a fancy word for a God-given prediction of something that will happen in the future. And so in this case, it's a prophecy about the coming of Jesus. And so Isaiah 9:6, we've been looking at it quite a bit lately. It says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." It says, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. And it's like, it's a boy, a son is given. What's his name? What's his name? And his name will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And you have to admit, that's a bit of a complicated name, right? That's a bit, I mean, like, we all know that family where they name their kid, and you're just like, how in the world did you come up with that name? And it's like, what's going on here when we look at this? But you see, we got to understand, back in that culture, back in this time, your name was who you were. It described a lot of things about you. And so you have this name, Messiah, and it's being predicted 700 years before Jesus is born. So Isaiah gives this prophecy, and his name will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, because in his very essence he would be he would be that Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, Mighty God. And so last week we looked at every one of those, and Pastor Mark gave an overview of each one of them. And so today I want to zero in on one of them, and that's Wonderful Counselor. Last weekend, we talked to you about each of these titles and spent a few minutes discussing each one. And today, I get the opportunity to dig deep here. What does it mean that the Messiah would come and that he would be this wonderful counselor? But there's another question that I think could be asked here. And that's, what's this doing here in Isaiah? Because 700 years before the birth of Christ is where we find this prophecy about unto us a child is born, his name will be. 700 years. Some of you are like, what does that matter? That's a fair question. Well, just to put it into context, we're right now in the final weeks of the year 2016, right? And so 700 years ago, it was just about New Year's Eve, the year 1316. How many of you are old enough to remember what was going on back then? I didn't think so. And so sometimes I have to wonder, like, if my ancestors, if perhaps my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather ever wondered what his family line would be like 700 years later. Sometimes I just wonder.
Well, how far do you think this water goes? There's got to be land on the other side somewhere. I bet in 700 years, our great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be over there doing something spectacular. Yeah. Why, I bet my great-great-great-great-grandson will be in communications. And he will be so productive, far too productive, to ever have a clean office. Ever. Olaf Brayland, what do you think your great-great-great-great-grandson will be doing?
Oh, I bet he'll be very handsome. He'll be a millennial, you know.
Wow.
And his pants will be very, very tight.
What? So he'll be a girl?
No. It'll be cool for men to wear skinny pants, won't it? He'll make it work. What about you, Dietrich Furr? What do you think your great-great-great-great-great-grandson will be like?
Well, first, he will learn to fly.
So he will be a bird?
Nine. No, he will fly in a machine under its own power, invented by a great German scientist. Yeah. And then he will take a massive pay cut and become a pastor.
Is that like a priest?
Kind of. Except you can be married and play golf. And then he will be part of a great church in the Black Hills of South Dakota.
Oh, in Switzerland, right?
No, nine. No.
Well, maybe our great-great-great-great-great-grandsons can, along with the great-great-great-great-great-grandsons of Cornelius Kroneberg and Luigi Totino can lead the greatest church in the entire Northern Hills region.
Oh!
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed!
Yeah.
Indeed! Yeah!
I'm not really sure where to go from there. I think I'm just gonna have the band come out, and I'm just gonna walk off. So I don't know how you transition out of that, but I think the best was we had this idea. It was like, do you think Pastor Mark's gonna go for this? And he did. It was awesome. But anyways, there is a correlation there. What in the world was going on in Isaiah's day that made this so important? Well, the reality is they weren't a whole lot different back then than we are right now. And so oftentimes when we open the Bible, we ask a very good question. What does it mean for me in what I'm going through today? But I think that is a good, maybe a second question to ask. I think a better first question is, what did this mean to them back then when it was written? Because the reality is, when we're opening up our Bible, the text we're reading could never mean today what it didn't originally mean back then. And so what I want to do is this. Let's try and move back into their life, into their world, and let's ask that first question. What was going on in their culture at that time? Why did the people of Isaiah's day need to hear this? What was it that was going on back then? When it said here that the coming Messiah, that Jesus was going to be coming and he would be a wonderful counselor, we need to look at what kind of counsel they were receiving at that time. Ready for that? Look with me in Isaiah. We're going to rewind one chapter to chapter 8. It says, someone may say to you, let's ask the mediums and those who consult the spirits of the dead. With their whisperings and mutterings, they will tell us what to do. And then he kind of talks reality into him here. He says, but shouldn't people ask God for guidance? Should the living seek guidance from the dead? See, where were people going for spiritual guidance? Where were they going to get advice that they needed for everyday life? Well, in order to receive spiritual guidance, people were turning to what we would refer to today as the occult, sadly. And it was a dark time back then. We call these things New Age today, but there isn't anything new about them. And on top of that, they're completely empty. Eastern religions, Hinduism, tarot readings, mediums, that sort of stuff, horoscopes, completely useless back then and still completely useless today. And then one verse later, it says, look to God's instructions and teachings. People who contradict his word are completely in the dark. How far in the dark are they? Completely, right? So they're in the dark. And then the next chapter says, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. So why did these people in Isaiah's day need this whole unto us a child is born, his name will be Wonderful Counselor thing? I think it's because they were traveling through a season of really, really, really dark times. But church, it got even worse than that. The king who was reigning at this time was this king named Ahaz, and he was not one of the better leaders for the people of Israel, not one of the better kings that they had. And so he makes this terrible pact with another country. And not long after Isaiah's prophecy, we have this time period we enter into called the Babylonian captivity. And basically what this means is the Babylonian army is going to march on in. They're going to just kind of steamroll through Israel, and they're going to destroy the city of Jerusalem. And then the survivors, what's left of them, are going to be deported 500 miles away to the country of Babylon. So this is about to happen. And Isaiah is prophesying, and much of this is due to the counsel of King Ahaz. And so Isaiah chapter 8, verses 21 and 22, it gives us this idea of what's about to transpire when this happens. It says, they will go from one place to another, weary and hungry. And because they are hungry, They will rage and curse their king and their God. And it's like, hold on a second. Yeah, the king might have gotten you into some of this stuff, but God didn't walk away from you. You walked away from him. And so there's this concept of light and darkness that hits them again. And then the passage continues. They will look up to heaven and down at the earth. But wherever they look, there will be trouble and anguish and dark despair. They'll be thrown out into the darkness. So again, you see darkness and death and darkness. And you're sitting here thinking, dude, I thought this was supposed to be a Christmas message. Like, what's up with this? But that's what's going on at the time of Isaiah when all this prophesying happened about Jesus. And then again in chapter 9, there's this prophecy of light. In Isaiah 9:2, it says, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. And so all of a sudden, this whole entire mood begins to shift. And Isaiah says, right now we're in this season of darkness. And it's a rough time. It's a rough season to be in. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And the end of that tunnel is going to be that first Christmas time. For unto us a child is born. This season of light will roll back the season of darkness. And darkness will not get the final word in our story. And that's the prophecy of Isaiah 9. And so I think about that verse, Isaiah 9:2, and I think about that for us as a church. I think about that for me and for my family. And I just wonder if there's some here today, and you would say, that's the verse I need to hear, or that's the verse I need to begin to apply to my life. Because if you were honest, many of you would say that this season we're in right now is not the best season for you. You might be here today and you're finding yourself smack dab in the middle of a dark season in your life. Some of you will be remembering 2016 as just a year of major darkness, the year the adoption fell through. Or maybe some of you will look back and remember this was the season that long-awaited, long-prayed-for pregnancy ended in tragedy. I think of people that I know who are job hunting again that just can't seem to make sense of this. And maybe you're thinking, you know what? I don't want to hear Christmas carols right now. This is a tough season for me. And for many, maybe it's the first year of joint custody. And that's difficult. The kids are being at mom's place for Christmas Eve and then dad's place on Christmas Day. And you're traveling through just a dark season right now. And if that's you, I have something to say to you. May the light of God's grace just simply come in and overtake this season of darkness in your life. May God bring you unexpected joy, even in the middle of that darkness. We're praying that our wonderful counselor would walk with you through this dark time. And because of who he is, church, listen to this. You can have hope that God can take that darkness in your life and he can show you and somebody else around you what only he is capable of bringing someone through. That's why this passage is here in Isaiah 9. These people were traveling through an absolute mess. And right in the middle of the mess, there's this prophecy that the Messiah, that Jesus would come, that light would dawn, that darkness would not get the final words, that there can be hope in the middle of darkness. And the people wait, and then time goes on, and seasons change, and then eventually that timeline leads to this young woman by the name of Mary. And she has this son, and they lay him in a manger because the Holiday Inn was all booked up that day, and it was the only place they could find, right? And God comes to the planet that he created, and he comes to this lower income family, and he's placed in a food trough that they use to feed horses and cattle. The answer has come. And John, a guy who eventually traveled with Jesus for 3 years, he would write about the coming of Jesus with these words in John 1. And we read this last weekend also, but it says, in the beginning was the Word. Who was the Word? Jesus, right? And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was been made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And so John looks at the coming of Jesus, and he says that in him was life, and that life was light. And I wonder if when John wrote that, if he was reflecting on the words from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. And listen, maybe you are at a point today where you see that darkness, and you're saying, I don't want that junk in my life anymore. I don't want this to define me any longer. And there are things that you're involved with that are dark and that have been taking over. Or maybe you're letting things from your past make you feel dark and isolated and alone, or pain or hurt that's been eating you up. And it is just simply time to fully hand that over to him. And the question then is, are you ready to say, yeah, I'm not liking this darkness any longer. I see that Jesus is light. He's the one who can cut out that darkness, and you see that. But maybe you just don't know what to do with it. And that question of where do we start? How do we do this? So let's read these next two verses, because I think this will give us a bit of an answer. John chapter 8. It says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, this is a little further into Jesus' life, by the way. He said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And then Psalm 119, verse 105, says, your word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light for my path. I remember growing up and being in middle school, and we did this experiment that many of you have probably also done, and if you haven't, you can do this with your kids. It was great for us, and we would take two pots. We would fill them with the exact same kind of soil. We would plant the exact same seeds in them, and we would give them the same amount of water, everything, except for one of them we would cover with a coffee can. And so we did everything the same. We just kept that one under that coffee can. We never, ever exposed it to the light. And so after this test period, we took the coffee can off of the one, and we assessed our experiment. And what we found looked something like this. And so the one on the far right was the one that was healthy. It had been kept in the sunlight, and it was full, it was green, it was strong, it was healthy, right? And the one that had been kept in the darkness was like that one in the middle. It was pale. It lacked nutrition. It was weak. Many of the stems couldn't even support their own weight. They just kind of drooped. They looked depressed. And so our teacher was going to throw these plants away after our experiment was done, and we had learned what we were going to learn through this. But our entire class, we got together and we're like, we started to plead with our teacher, like, can we just take this one that's really sick looking, and can we just see what happens when we expose it to the same light that the healthy one had? And so at first, it looked like it wasn't going to make it. It started to get a little bit worse. But in just a matter of days, the leaves started to look greener, and the stems were able to support their weight, and they were getting stronger, and the color was coming back, and eventually that plant was fully restored. And listen, the correlation is if we follow him, we open up our entire hearts to him. That's how light breaks through into our darkness, no matter where it is that we've been. So his word shows you, and his Holy Spirit is in you, and it guides you, and it brings light into our lives, and that light gets rid of that darkness, and we turn to him. There's another interesting comparison to these plants is if you leave their light source in one spot and you don't move it, they're actually going to begin to turn towards that light source, like you can see the one on the far left. So they'll actually move closer and closer to that light source. It draws them in. They turn to the light. They follow the light. Even plant life gets this concept. And this Christmas, you can turn things around by giving over that darkness to Jesus, by turning to him, leaning in, and letting his light shine in. We read in the book of Matthew that there's this day that Jesus saw these crowds around him, and he goes up on this hillside, and it says that he sat down. And then his disciples, they came to him, and he began to teach everybody who was there. And what comes next is the Sermon on the Mount. And so in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is sitting there, and he said things like what we find in Matthew 5. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." And as I've read that throughout my life, I've often wondered, does that sound strange to anybody else? Love your enemy. Like, dude, that is not how it's done, man. Bless the people who bless you. You love the people who love you first. You despise the people who despise you. You hate the people who hurt you, right? Isn't that how it works? And even as you hear me saying that, do you feel the darkness kind of rolling in a little bit? And let me ask a question. What is this for you? What is it for you? Maybe you were hurt by somebody close to you. A parent, a business partner, someone from your church, a fiance, a boss, a coworker, a brother or sister, close friend. What is it for you? And let me ask this another question. What are you going to do with that? Because sometimes first that darkness happens to you, and then the darkness happens in you, but then eventually it turns in this pattern where darkness happens through you. And Jesus is talking here to real people with real hurts and real wounds. And he's saying, what are you going to do with that? Because wounds that are left untreated, they begin to develop infections. And when Jesus said to love your enemies and to pray for people who persecute you, maybe it's because he's on a rescue mission to rescue us from becoming angry, bitter old people. Guys, what if this is wonderful counsel that we needed to hear? What if this is counsel from our Creator God who knows you and he made you and he loves you? What if he's our wonderful counselor? What if with this counsel, he intends to pull you from that darkness and pull that darkness from you? Church, what if he's our wonderful counselor? Listen to the words of Jesus. And what if he's attempting to pull us from that darkness? Pull that darkness from us. What if he is our wonderful counselor? One of the most distressing questions Jesus ever asked his disciples was in the book of Luke chapter 6, and he says, "Why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? Why do you call me Lord and then ignore my counsel?" A couple questions, and we're just going to wrap this thing up. First, has there been movement in your life over this past year? Maybe an area where you've kind of sensed that God was whispering to you, I need you to get ready for something. Like you may be traveling down a dark path. I need you to leave it. I need you to follow me. And not perfectly, but maybe even with some small steps, you began to leave that old pattern. And I just wonder how many here today would say, yeah, that's true of me. And maybe not perfection, but it's direction. We just take a moment to hear God whisper into your life and keep moving. Keep moving. Take a moment to experience the pleasure of God over those steps, over that new direction as he leads you to identify what that next step is in front of you. And then you take that step. And then you identify what the next one is and you take that one. And eventually you're moving on this new direction, being pulled out of that darkness, having that darkness being pulled out of you. And if that's true of you, just take a moment to realize that in those moments, God is proud of you. And he's saying, that's my boy. That's my girl right there. See that guy over there? That person is taking steps. They aren't who they once were. That's my boy. And there's another question that begins to come out of that naturally, and that's, what have you maybe been saying no to? And has there been an area of your life where the Spirit of God has been leaning in and he's been kind of poking a little bit, but you've kind of locked your knees and crossed your arms like, not God, I want to follow you, God, but I'm not going to go minister to those people over there. I want to follow you, God, but my neighbor is just simply unreachable. Nope, I'm not going to do it. Or maybe something else. Let me just ask, what if Jesus is trying to pull you out of the darkness and trying to pull the darkness out of you? And I would just plead with you, if you're going through a season where you keep stiff-arming God, would today be the day where you would go, today, God, by your grace, I've got to leave this darkness behind. I know, God, that if I stay on this path, it's going to cause a lot of people a lot of damage, including myself. And today, if you hear his voice, open your heart, open your hands, and just go, God, by your grace, I'll move. God, by your grace, I will take a step starting this day. This Christmas season is the day, the start to me allowing you to lead me fully. Church, what if he is our wonderful counselor? What if he is our creator God who knows us and loves us and made us? And what if he's on a rescue mission to pull us from that darkness and to pull that darkness out from us? For unto us a child is born. That's that light coming into the dark world that first Christmas. May God give you his joy this Christmas. Let's pray. God, when I look at the events that were surrounding the birth of Jesus, sometimes I don't even know where to begin, but to just simply stop what I'm doing and just say, God, thank you for being our wonderful counselor who's able to take the mess that becomes of our lives, whatever it is, and you're able to flip it and use it for something beautiful. And God, I think there's somebody here today who needed to hear that and just needs that reminder that you're here to pull us out of that. And so we ask, God, that you would do just that in our lives, that you'd be that wonderful counselor for us, that some here today may be going through just a rough season. And God, may you step into that situation, whatever it is, and show just exactly what it is that you and only you are capable of doing through us simply being open enough to saying, Jesus, take over. And so, God, we pray that you, being the good God that you are, would just do that work, that we can look back on this season as one being filled with joy, that we could spread that joy to those around us. And we'll do that in your strength and power. It's in your name we pray. Amen.